As of now, 65% is my favorite layout. It balances size and functionality for my uses, and does not have any of that god-awful function row that messes with the width to depth ratio on boards. The extra column to the right adds a ton of functionality, but also creates an imbalanced look where the right side modifiers are thicker than the left. This becomes especially evident when using keycaps where the modifiers are not the same colors as the alphas. The JER Mini tries to improve on this by symmetrically adding a column to the left. In some ways, the design of the JER Mini is very simple with just a couple trendy elements. It's a box on top of a wedge, but this time the bottom wedge is angled inward in the rear. This design is most iconically seen in the TGR Jane V2, as well as in boards like the Polaris and the KBD-8X Mark II. The only thing of note in the side profile is how low to the ground this board is. While the bezel looks pretty chunky, the actual distance from the resting surface to the top of the bottom row of caps is pretty low. Take a comparison to the QXP, which is a board that specifically had this in mind. It's almost the same height, while the E6 V2 is noticeably taller. I generally like boards that do this as it seems like an efficient use of space, whereas taller boards seem more bloated than they have to be. This will also be more comfortable for people who type with their wrists resting on the desk. The rear is what you'd expect. The mini USB port is on the left side of the board, and the cutout is of pretty standard tightness. I prefer centered ports, but this was probably a convenient spot considering the lack of keys in that corner, and of course I would have preferred Type-C. The bottom is kind of weird. As you can see, there are these 3 stages to the wedge. The front centimeter or so is a more aggressive angle that reduces at the middle half. Then there's a step in the rear half, which seems to increase the angle yet again. I'm not really sure what the goal of this approach was. My other keyboard from the JER series, J80, has a similar bottom, so this might just be a signature design element. Another thing is the placement of the weight. This seems to be raw and roughly polished piece of brass with the engraving lasered on. The most notable thing about it is that it's off-center. The Jane V2 CE had something similar, where the weight was directly below the alphas for sound reasons or whatever, but following that logic, this is on the wrong side. The weight starts at around the G key and extends to the right end of the board. Kinda weird. The off-center weight means an axis of rotation that's not totally down the middle. Based on the length of the board, the midpoint is around the middle of the H key, but instead the axis seems to be on the left side of the J key. This is very important information for many in the community. There are a lot more interesting elements on the top. To start, the side bezels are approximately the same width, and so are the top and bottom ones. However, the bottom bezel is made of this separate piece that protrudes up a bit. It's not intrusive, but adds a little bit of flair to the part of the board closest to you. It also contains 3 pinholes. On mine, they're configured to be indicator lights. To the left is that all-important macro column. It's 4 keys tall and is separated by the 65% portion by what looks like a 0.25U gap. The top key is missing in order to make room for the logo. A lot of people seem to fill this in with paint, but I haven't gotten around to that yet. The one I have is a E-white version which was available a couple months before the group buy. The finish is very nice and is a true white as opposed to a light gray on Mao. Where anodization feels more like a raw material surface, this feels very close to paint. I really prefer the texture of this finish over anodizing. If you were to wash this, you'd be able to get it squeaky clean, whereas an anodized surface will always feel matte. These 8 gold-colored screws on the back holds the top to the bottom. The front middle 2 screws also holds the separate front lip in place. Undoing them reveals that this board is bottom mounted, meaning the plate is screwed into the bottom case by 8 mounting points, none of which is right under the spacebar. On the inside of the bottom piece, you can see 2 screws that hold in the weight. On the group buy page, there's a warning about potentially damaging the threads when removing it, so you should probably leave that alone. Moving on to the PCB, you can see there's not a lot of supported layouts. Other than ISO, there's the option of choosing between regular and stepped caps lock, as well as 6.25 or 7U bottom row. It doesn't even support split backspace, which is a bit strange. On the front side of the PCB, there are 3 slots for single color indicator LEDs. Interestingly, on the top left, where the logo is, there are footprints for SMD RGB LEDs, much like the Canoe. I assumed there had been previous iterations of the design where that logo would shine light through. On the 4 sides of the plate and the bottom case are these cutouts, which together make slots for the guides on the top piece. This allows the bottom and top halves to meet fairly consistently, though there is still a bit of give. In terms of finish, I can't directly comment on the from factory condition because I bought this secondhand, but I don't see anything that would signal to me that there were low manufacturing standards. Even the insides of the case, which won't be visible at any point, have consistent finishes, and while some of you might not like the scratchy finish on the weight, I would argue that that's a conscious choice to add a bit of raw edge. The overall construction of this board is pretty standard, but has elements of well thought out design. Every piece fits together to a reasonable tolerance, and the finish is of good quality. I'm pleased with this board. Being a bottom mount keyboard with an aluminum plate, there's really not much to say about the typing experience on the JER Mini. As expected, it's not really flexible, but there is just a bit of softness on the bottom mount. There's not much vibration transfer from the typing hand to the resting hand, and the feel is more or less consistent across all areas. In terms of mounting, it doesn't really do anything special, nor did it ever try. So it's expected that the feel is familiar. The same goes for the sound. The design is relatively tame and the build is pretty good, but the thing that distinguishes the JER Mini from other 65% boards is the layout, more specifically the macro column. I think it really does look great, but there are some usability concerns. This is the same problem I had when using the DSi modular keyboard. I would accidentally hit the bottommost key instead of the left shift. The problem isn't as bad as before because this column is separated, but I often find myself looking down after a copy and paste didn't work. Because of this common mistake, I assigned the bottom key to be nothing, which seems kinda wasteful. Thankfully, I don't have the same problem with the escape key because the top left corner is absent. So from a pure functionality point of view, a missing key on the bottom would have helped. Though that would really mess with the aesthetics of the layout, so I'll just have to get better with this. Besides, depending on how you find your left control, you might not even have this problem. To add to the usability concerns, the board is programmed using Bootmapper Client, which is more limiting than QMK. I heard all Bootmapper Client PCBs can be ported to use QMK, but I don't know if anyone has done that. For the most part, this is a pretty regular keyboard, with its main appeal being the aesthetically pleasing layout. That macro column does a lot to balance out the right-heavy 65% layout, while also creating space for artisans for people who are into those. I still haven't really figured out what to put there, but in the future maybe I'll experiment with what works best for me while video editing or something. It's an inoffensive typing experience and sound, and I'll probably keep it around to take pictures of keycaps.